on that first Easter morning, most of the disciples struggled to hear the good news. Doubts clouded their minds. Negativity took root. And hope vanished with a simple shaking of their heads. That's rubbish, they said. This was fake news. They didn't believe the women, even though Jesus told them over and over and over again that this would happen. But Peter, grieving the loss of his closest friend, his Messiah, his teacher, his companion, the one that he left his career and family for, the one who rescued him from danger, the one he challenged, the one who called him his rock, the one he denied 3 times, the one he abandoned as he took his last breath. Yes, Peter, who was now wandering through the valley of the shadow of death, heard Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the other women, and hope sprung forth. Could it possibly be true? I imagine Peter rushing past the disciples, running to the tomb like a new parent, rushing through the halls of the hospital, trying to make it to their partner's side before their child is born. His heart beats faster and faster with each step. He feels the pressure in his chest. It's getting harder to breathe, and yet he can't stop. He must keep running if there's any chance of what they said is actually true. And there it is. The stone. It is rolled away. He sprinted those last few steps like an Olympian racing towards the finish line. He stopped, bent over, and looked inside. His body was gone. The women spoke truth. He is risen indeed. Even though Jesus told them that he would be crucified and die and on the 3rd day rise, you can imagine that in their grief, in their despair, reeling from this loss, they had forgotten. They had forgotten the promise. They had lost their way. But the entire story of God's relationship with us is a story of the unexpected. Elizabeth didn't expect to get pregnant at her old age. Mary didn't expect to hear that she was pregnant with child. The Magi didn't expect to follow a star that would lead them to this new king. Peter didn't expect that he would drop his nets and follow Jesus. Lazarus didn't expect to be raised from the dead. The women didn't expect the tomb to be empty. Martin Luther King Jr. didn't expect the elders of his church would nominate him to lead the Montgomery bus boycott. Dolores Huerta didn't expect to lead the charge for migrant workers' rights. Last year, Alvaro and I didn't expect to be here with you today. And I and I imagine that there is someone here this morning that didn't expect to be here last night. But year after year, day after day, hour after hour, this story draws us in. And we hope. And while with hope we desire for things to change, this hope is deeper. This hope trusts in the promise that things will change. This hope transforms us to be part of that change. Reverend Isaac Munther, the pastor of the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem, whose Christmas Eve sermon, Christ in the Rubble, went viral, was asked in an interview this past week how he was preparing for Easter. He said that their Good Friday has lasted way too long. But in Easter, the final word is truth and justice and life. Death cannot have the final word. Injustice and tyranny cannot have the final word. Ultimately, goodness, righteousness, and justice will prevail. And when we believe this, we will not live in despair. And hope springs forth. If the tomb is empty, if Jesus has been raised from the dead, then life as we've known and expected it is no longer. Violence and death did not have the last word. Love won. It doesn't make sense. But God does the unexplainable. Even when it feels like Good Friday is on repeat, we know that Sunday is coming. Hope can be hard to find in our world. There are plenty of reasons to be cynical, to throw in the towel and accept that everything is doomed. New life seems impossible, and yet hope doesn't die. Like that first green shoot that pops up from the earth after a long winter freeze. Or the flowers that perk up when you put fresh water in the vase. Or a family finally moving out of a shelter into permanent housing. Or that phone call that you pick up and they say, "You've got the job." Signs of new life all around us. Hope springing forth again and again and again. In hospital rooms and gardens, classrooms and city parks, in blessing boxes and potluck meals and phone calls and sympathy cards and dinner with neighbors and gathering around tables and marching for trans and migrant friends and singing and laughing and crying and in the breaking of bread. The risen Christ is all around us. What gives you hope? Where do you see signs of new life? Where have you experienced resurrection? I really want you to think about that. Do you have something in mind? When you walked in this morning, you should have received a paper butterfly or flower. And if you didn't, I'm sure if you raise your hand, our ushers will bring you one. If we still have some, maybe. Flowers and butterflies are symbols associated with Easter, with transformation, with resurrection, with new life. Now, on your flower or your butterfly, I want you to write that thing down. What gives you hope? Or where do you see signs of new life? Or how have you experienced resurrection? Take a moment and write it down. There's pens located in the pew rack in front of you, or maybe you have one in a purse, but you'll have to share with a friend. Just take a moment, write that down. Easter isn't just a one-day event. You can keep writing as I'm talking. You don't have to stop. Easter is a season where we celebrate the risen Christ for 50 days. And we are Easter people, which means we celebrate that love wins every day. And so we are going to take these offerings, what you've written down on your butterfly or your flower, and we are going to collect your good news of hope and life and resurrection. We're going to collect these in the baskets at the front when you come forward for communion. We also have a basket at the exit if you need a little more time to think or to write, or if you're singing up here in the choir or playing bells. But we're going to take those and we're going to hang those up for everyone to see next week. Because sometimes when we're walking through the valley of the shadow of death, we need to be reminded that Sunday's coming, that death doesn't have the last word, that hope springs forth. And that's part of what being in community is all about. That just like the women told Peter, we sometimes get to tell each other the good news too. The good news that death and pain and suffering and evil are never the last word. And if you can't think of anything to write down today, that's okay. Maybe you just need to see these words next week. Or maybe you want to take your flower or your butterfly home and put it in a place where you will see it often and be reminded of this good news. That though we may weep through the longest nights, though we may stare at the empty tomb with more questions than answers, even though we may run our fingers over the burial cloths and still long for more, today we are a people of hope. We believe in new beginnings. We believe that the God who created the world is stronger than death. We believe that Jesus abides among us, healing, teaching, and leaving fingerprints throughout our world. We believe that a tomb could not hold him. We believe that the sun does rise. We believe that Peter was there with questions, awe, and faith the size of a mustard seed. We believe that the story is not over yet, for God is among us. Today, we are a people of hope. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.